Dark origins, the truth behind fairy tales. The stories we tell our children have been sanitized, simplified, and sweetened. But beneath their innocent surface lies a darker truth, reflections of historical traumas, forbidden desires, and harsh realities our ancestors faced. Today, we explore a tale you thought you knew, Little Red Riding Hood, a sweet story of a girl, her grandmother, and a big bad wolf, or so you were told. Little Red Riding Hood. The sweet tale of a young girl in a crimson cape visiting her sick grandmother with a basket of treats. When a wolf swallows grandma and tries to trick our heroine, a brave woodsman intervenes, rescuing both from the wolf's belly. A charming cautionary tale about talking to strangers, wrapped up with a happy ending. But the Little Red Riding Hood that generations of children know today bears little resemblance to its origins. To understand the tale's true nature, we must travel back to 17th century France during the reign of Louis XIV, the Sun King. This was an era of stark contrasts. At Versailles, aristocrats danced in lavish halls while in the countryside, peasants struggled against famine and the constant threat of wolves, both animal and human. The forests of France were genuinely dangerous places, where wolves occasionally attacked and killed humans. Between 1580 and 1710, over 3,000 people were killed by wolves in France alone. But the human predators were equally feared. Banditry was rampant, and young women traveling alone were particularly vulnerable. Sexual violence was common and rarely punished, especially if the perpetrator was of higher social standing than his victim. It was in this world that Charles Perrault, a 67-year-old civil servant and member of the Académie Française, published his collection Tales of Mother Goose in 1697, which included Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, Little Red Riding Hood. In Perrault's version, after the wolf devours the grandmother, he invites Little Red into bed. The girl strips naked, yes, you heard that correctly, and joins him. Notice there's no deception about what big eyes you have. The girl simply disrobes as instructed. She then comments on his large teeth, whereupon he simply eats her. The end. Perrault concluded with this explicit moral. From this story, one learns that children, especially young ladies, pretty, courteous, and well-bred, do very wrong to listen to strangers, and it is not an unheard thing if the wolf is thereby provided with his dinner. Perrault wasn't writing for children, as we might assume. His audience was the sophisticated adults of Louis XIV's court. His tales were shared in literary salons, where the aristocracy and intelligentsia gathered to discuss literature and ideas. These salons were often hosted by women of high social standing, who wielded significant cultural influence despite their legal powerlessness. The tale served as a cautionary allegory about seduction in a society obsessed with courtship, appearances, and social climbing. Young women at court were constantly navigating sexual politics, where their virtue was their only real currency, yet they were expected to be charming and pleasing to men of power. The Red Hood itself, never described in detail by Perrault, but adopted enthusiastically by illustrators, became a powerful symbol. Red was an expensive dye, suggesting the girl's hood was a luxury item, perhaps given by an admirer, already suggesting sexual impropriety by the standards of the time. But Perrault didn't invent the story. He refined folk tales that had been passed down orally for generations. These earlier versions were even more disturbing. In a tale called The Story of Grandmother, collected by folklorist Paul Delarue from the French oral tradition, Red Riding Hood unknowingly cannibalizes her own grandmother. After the wolf kills the grandmother, he places bits of her flesh in the pantry and bottles her blood. When the girl arrives, he instructs her to eat the meat and drink the wine her grandmother has left for her. Then comes a bizarre striptease ritual. The wolf, in bed disguised as the grandmother, tells the girl she must throw each item of clothing into the fire because you won't need them anymore. As she disrobes, she performs a strange recitation of each garment. Where shall I put my apron? Throw it in the fire, my child. You won't need it anymore. Folklorists and anthropologists see in these elements clear indications of initiation rituals. The cannibalism represents the girl taking on the power of her female ancestor. The ritualistic disrobing symbolizes shedding childhood. Even the path with its needles or pins versus thorns that Little Red must choose between, in some versions represents the choice between industrious womanhood and idle pleasures. The red hood itself likely symbolized menstruation and sexual maturity. In medieval villages, a girl's first menstruation often marked her as ready for marriage, a literal transition from child to potential bride and mother. It wasn't until the Brothers Grimm published their collection, Children's and Household Tales, in 1812 that the woodsman appeared. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm were collecting stories in early 19th century Germany, a time when the middle class was rising and childhood was being redefined as a distinct and innocent phase of life that should be protected. Their version, while still violent, introduced the rescue, transforming a disturbing tale of sexual predation and female initiation into a more palatable story of danger overcome through masculine intervention. This reflected the emerging bourgeois values of protected female virtue and male heroism. Their collection was eventually marketed to children, though the brothers initially intended it as a scholarly preservation of German cultural heritage. With each edition, they softened the tales further, responding to middle-class sensibilities about what was appropriate for young minds. By the Victorian era, the tale had been thoroughly domesticated. Illustrations showed an increasingly younger Little Red Riding Hood, emphasizing her innocence rather than her budding sexuality. The wolf became less a metaphor for male seduction and more a general symbol of danger and disobedience. This sanitization reached its peak in the 20th century, with animated adaptations removing even the violence of the wolf's death. What began as a graphic tale of sexual initiation, cannibalism, and death became a cartoon where no one is permanently harmed and all dangers are easily overcome. But the power of the original story persists in our collective imagination. Even children sense that there's something more primal lurking beneath the surface of this simple tale. Something about hunger, both literal and sexual. Something about the dangers that await when we stray from the established path. Something about the loss of innocence that can never be fully reversed. Psychoanalysts from Bruno Bettelheim to Alan Dundes have analyzed the tale as a reflection of universal psychological dynamics, the conflict between pleasure principle and reality principle, the terror and necessity of sexual maturation, the ambivalence toward growing up. The enduring appeal of Little Red Riding Hood lies precisely in its dark undercurrents. As sanitized as it has become, we still recognize in it something true about the dangers of the world and the inevitable loss of innocence. The wolf still lurks in our forests, our cities, our psyches, and the Red Hood still marks the transition from protected innocence to vulnerable knowledge. The next time you hear this seemingly simple children's tale, remember what lies beneath its surface: centuries of human experience with desire, danger, and transformation. For in the oldest versions, Little Red Riding Hood does not escape the wolf. She is consumed by him, becoming one with the very danger she sought to avoid. And perhaps that's the most honest ending of all. Join us next time on Dark Origins, as we uncover the disturbing truth behind Snow White, a tale not of true love's kiss, but of murderous jealousy, beauty as currency, and punishments too grotesque for children's ears. If you're intrigued by the dark truths behind the stories we tell our children, subscribe to Dark Origins and click the bell icon. You'll be notified whenever we unveil the disturbing reality behind another beloved tale. Each month, we'll peel back the layers of sanitization to reveal the historical horrors that shaped our cultural heritage. Until our paths cross again in the shadows of folklore, I'm Aidan Reese, reminding you that every fairy tale was born from darkness before it stepped into the light. Sleep well, if the stories permit.